Kia ora koutou katoa, ko Hayley Buchan toko ingoa. I am the Healthy Families Hutt Valley Manager, and today I am also joined by my colleague Aileen Campbell from our Hutt City Council transport team. Thank you, Alison and the ANA, for the opportunity to present today and being part of what has been a great webinar series so far. Today, I will share a little bit about the Healthy Families New Zealand approach and some of the mahi that is happening here in Te Awa Kaurangi. And then I'll hand over to Aileen, who will share in more detail one of our recent people-centred projects that we've partnered on alongside Waka Kotahi New Zealand Transport Agency and our learnings and successes along this journey. So Healthy Families New Zealand is a large-scale initiative funded by the Ministry of Health that aims to bring community leadership together in a united effort for better health in the places where we live, learn, work and play in order to prevent chronic disease. Our goal for Healthy Families New Zealand is that all New Zealanders get to enjoy social and physical environments that enable healthy food and physical activity choices, being smoke-free, drinking alcohol only in moderation, and increasing mental health and resilience for the prevention of chronic disease. Healthy Families New Zealand is in 10 locations across Aotearoa, New Zealand. These 10 locations have higher than average rates of preventable chronic disease and higher than average rates of risk factors for preventable chronic disease and some of the highest deprivation levels in the country. Our providers for Healthy Families New Zealand locations are providers that sit outside of our traditional health sector. We know that 80% of our health and wellbeing is impacted and determined by factors outside of the health system, including our social and physical environments. And that's why our lead providers are organisations outside of the health sector, including councils, regional sports trusts, Māori and Pacific providers, and whānau order providers. We have an explicit focus on inequity, improving Māori health and improving health equity for groups at increased risk of preventable chronic disease. Healthy Families New Zealand takes a systems approach to preventing chronic disease. So systems thinking allows us to see how everything is connected and interdependent. This means we're creating the social and physical environments that enable us all to thrive by addressing the underlying conditions that impact our health and well-being. By taking a systems approach, we're looking for the cause or causes of the issue rather than treating the symptom. We use these 6 conditions of change to create sustainable change needed to benefit the health and well-being of our people. So we focus on influencing policies, practices, and resource flows. And we have a really strong focus on relationships and connections, and also shifting power dynamics more to our community, so communities can lead and own the solutions that are going to work best for them, and also be part of the decision-making process. Often the most challenging of these 6 conditions is the mental models. This is often where our assumptions sit. So a big part of our work is actually trying to challenge the status quo and some of those assumptions. Healthy Families New Zealand is at the opposite end of the health spectrum to health services or interventions. Healthy Families New Zealand is focused on building a strong prevention system. Equity is built into the Healthy Families New Zealand approach, and this recognises that people with different levels of advantage require different approaches and resources to achieve equitable outcomes. As a Healthy Families New Zealand workforce, we're enabled to learn by doing. So safe to try out new ways of working and using real-time reflection to help us adapt as we go. This requires flexible and adapting contracting by our funders that allow us to align to outcomes and principles rather than outputs. Partnerships is also key to the way we work. Our locations work with our communities and local leaders who can influence systems change and create the change that we need for the health and well-being of our people. This place-based approach means our Healthy Families New Zealand workforce are embedded in our communities that we're working with, and solutions are locally driven. So that's a really important point. Our solutions are owned by our communities and not delivered to community. And often that's quite a shift in the way we think about our locally led solutions. Our locally led solutions are driven by our people. So they're driven from the lived experiences and insights of our communities. Our people that are impacted the most, and our approach values this evidence for action. Accelerating and mobilising action alongside our key champions in our communities, our influencers and our change agents from a variety of sectors, including local government, iwi, Pacifica, sport and recreation, business and health, helps us to achieve the collective impact we need for our people. So Healthy Families Hutt Valley is led by Hutt City Council. So my team sits within Hutt City Council. The team works across Te Awa Kairangi, so across the Hutt Valley region, which has a total population of about 148,000 people. Our population is diverse and some of our people experience major health inequities. The majority of funding for Healthy Families New Zealand goes into the dedicated prevention workforce in each of our locations. The workforce represents a range of professional backgrounds, from public health to storytelling and engagement to system strategy to social innovation. This diverse workforce brings the wide range of skill sets that is needed to put the Healthy Families New Zealand kaupapa and approach into action. Like most regions, Hutt Valley is experiencing population growth and some major infrastructure and urban design challenges. This is why we have invested in a healthy city design lead in our team. So this role has a strong focus of looking at our active transport and urban design systems and ensuring they meet the needs of our people and how they move around our city. So being based within council gives us the opportunity to influence planning and decisions that can contribute to the health and well-being of our populations. So how our cities and our spaces and our places are designed can influence where and how we play and how we're physically active in our cities, how we move around our city and neighbourhoods and how we choose to move around our cities and neighbourhoods, the food that we can grow and access, how we get to work and school and sport and recreation activities, our ability to spend time in nature or spaces that support our haora or mental well-being, and whether things like smoking and drinking alcohol are visible to our young people. Through engaging with the people, our community, who spend time in our cities, spaces and places, we are able to identify the elements that actually undermine our well-being. Driven by this lived experience and community voice, we have the opportunity to influence those that can create change to design for their benefit. Therefore, we're putting people at the heart of decision making and planning. This approach of doing with rather than doing to has made a significant difference to how we're enabled and trusted to work this way. So what does this look like in action? So we know that our environments and our urban design impacts our health and well-being. So how can we make a difference in our cities and in our neighbourhoods? And here are just some examples of some of the mahi that is happening across Te Awa Kairangi. So we work with Hutt City Council and Upper Hutt City Council to ensure that our outdoor spaces and places have strong smoke-free policies and practice in response to strong community support for smoke-free spaces. We're part of the conversations about creating spaces safe from alcohol-related harm with our councils and alongside our communities. We've partnered with Hutt City Council and Sport New Zealand on Play in the Hut, which uses local community insights and data to inform decisions and action for play across our communities, including play streets, where our communities are taking back this public space and road space for play. Hutt City Council is also committed to active transport with a lot of investment going into cycleways and share paths. We're able to support this infrastructure investment by working alongside our communities on cycling initiatives and making cycling more accessible to our community. We advocated for drinking fountains to be accessible to our people. We've gone from 5 water fountains to over 25 fountains across Lower Hutt since starting this work. We lend a hand to local community groups that are leading work in food resilience and work to support those making healthy kai a reality for more of our people. This includes the roles council can play in supporting food resilience in our cities. And more recently, we've partnered with Hutt City Council on Awaha Evolving Spaces. So this mahi was kick-started from Waka Kotahi New Zealand Transport Agency funding through the Innovating Streets for People initiative. So Healthy Families Hutt Valley supported this mahi with the applications to receive the funding as it aligns well to the Healthy Families New Zealand approach. So we support this project at a governance level. We also support this project through communications and storytelling and bringing that lived experience of our people to the fore. And we're also able to support with the community engagement approach that we take for our Awaha Evolving Spaces projects. So I'm now going to pass over to Aileen from our Hutt City Council transport team to talk more about this mahi.
Kia ora koutou, and thank you, Hayley, for that. We're really grateful to Waka Kotahi for the opportunity to do this type of work and to the opportunity to work with the Healthy Families team and learn from their experience in co-designing with community. Awaha Evolving Spaces, this name and brand was developed to be able to separate this type of work from our more traditional council consultation approach. The word Awaha means to shape, create, and to form. And we're trying to reflect that evolving and testing our practice along the journey as we go. The opportunity that we've got, the Innovating Streets funding comes from Waka Kotahi New Zealand Transport Agency. It came out of their COVID response and allowed for 12-month projects that use tactical urbanism style approaches to use temporary trials to real-world test ideas with everybody who is affected. Quite often in traditional consultation, you'll hear from the people that that type of consultation works well from, and not from the broader community until things start to go on the ground. In this approach, the trials on the street are part of the engagement with community, and we're able to take on feedback, learnings, and how people actually experience the trials and use those to adapt them and inform the next phase. Innovating Streets for People, the intent is to create safer streets and spaces that are more people friendly and more enjoyable to spend time in. To work with the people that use the spaces the most and know them best and learn from their daily experiences. And again, to use those temporary improvements to test and trial changes that can be adapted along the way so that we have the freedom to fail reasonably quickly and that these ideas are not concreted in place. Waka Kotahi provide 90% of the funding for this work, with 10% coming from our council budgets. It's a new style of working in New Zealand, although it has worked very well overseas, and we've been learning from that. The big picture nationally is that we have in New Zealand a big shift, focus on mode shift. We are one of the most car-reliant countries in the world. And as we have an increasing population and growth in our urban areas, that's increasing congestion and increasing carbon outputs, which is not the direction that we want to go in. So mode shift towards e-scooters, bikes, e-longboards, and all those micro-mobility ways of moving around has the opportunity to reduce congestion, help us to meet our national climate targets, and improve health and health equity for our people. To get there, regionally, we have a goal of a 40% shift towards active and public modes of transport by 2030, which is a huge shift in a short amount of time. Business as usual is not going to get us there, we know that. And we need to have safe options for these other modes of transport in order to allow more of our people to choose to use these modes of transport more often for more of these daily journeys. We know that perception of safety for these modes of transport is a big barrier to people using them nationally, and there's a lot of suppressed demand for biking, e-scooting, etc. around the place. People would like to do it, but they don't necessarily feel that it's safe enough for them and their children to use those modes to move around our cities. So there's a lot of investment in Lower Hutt and in our region and across the nation in cycleways and shared pathways The map that you see on the screen shows the existing network that we have in Lower Hutt, as well as the planned work that's happening. The purple line there is a new facility, the Beltway, that will be finished at the end of this month and links Taira and Nainai to our Hutt River Trail and down into Waterloo train station, which is a public transport hub. Knights Road is a connecting route between Waterloo train station, that public transport hub, one of our other transport hubs at the Queensgate Mall, and our Lower Hutt CBD. It goes past 4 schools and so serves approximately 2,000 students for their daily journeys to school, as well as coming into our CBD. These types of off-roads facilities that you can see on the map allow transport between suburbs. They're generally seen as safe and they link our public transport hubs through active transport. What's currently missing is those connections between the off-road cycleways and the places people go to school, to work and to play. Unfortunately, our networks are only as safe as the least safe connections, and so this is where we know that for this network, which we've invested in to realise its full potential, we need to make sure that there are safe connections linking these services and into the places where people want to go. As you can see from the map, Knights Road is a direct connection between the Beltway, Cycleway, public transport, the schools and Lower Hutt CBD. It's also a very wide street. It's the only option for people who can't, who are on mobility scooters, who can't use maybe buses to get into that public transport hub and into our CBD. And the purpose of what we're doing is to test a layout on this key connection that provides safer journeys for all modes of transport. If it works, it's a local solution that's demonstrated to work and can be applied on this route as well as elsewhere. So Knights Road is a temporary pathway the project is a temporary pathway that promotes active transport. It aligns to our council integrated transport strategy and to previous walking and cycling action plans, and it creates that connection to our planned and under construction infrastructure. What we're trying to achieve is that safer journeys for all modes of transport, more people using active and public transport modes more often, that it feels safer and that using these modes is seen to be safe, and that our actual safety improves. So we've been using some pretty new technology to use near-miss technology, near-miss incidents, because we know that crash incidents are underreported. It can take a very long time for us to have enough data in crash statistics to be able to build a case for change. Near-miss data lets us make those decisions more quickly. So the road needs to feel safe, safety needs to improve for all modes of transport, and it still needs to function effectively for all users, which is the residents, the services, and the people who are using it to commute. Using pop-up trials lets us test new ideas relatively cheaply, lets us involve the whole community in decisions and see in advance how these decisions are going to affect their regular daily lives. It lets us accelerate decision making because it lets us test ideas and show whether or not they work in the real local context where they'll be applied. And so it can inspire and enable positive change and get things done more quickly. The 50-kilometre environment that Knights Road is between the CBD and the station does put some limits on the nature of what we can test and trial. And with these temporary trials, we are working from the surface of the road up, so we cannot concrete, which does put some other constraints on what we can test and which community aspirations can be put into practice. But they still have allowed us to truly test ideas and layouts while change is still possible. Following the initial engagement with residents and community, there were 3 main areas that we've tested. These images on the screen are Waterloo intersection, which was identified as the area that people were most concerned about for safety before the trial took place. Working with Waka Kotahi, we were able to adapt what we were doing and extend the scope of the project to include this intersection, because without changes here, people weren't going to feel safe in getting to the other trials that we were putting into place. The top image there with the journeys overlaid shows the layout before the trials, and it also shows from drone footage captured during the trial, at the baseline, what the main movements are at this intersection by the different modes of transport. And the other thing that a lot of this drone footage has been able to do is capture every interaction. So incidences where there was 10 seconds or less between two modes of transport occupying the same space, and quantify that into near miss data, as well as plotting it all on a map of which journey was done. So this was a really rich data source for us that's let us really quantify some of those anecdotal experiences that people tell us about, but which we don't have the statistical data and crash or police information to look at. In the bottom picture there, you can see the trial that was put in place. So in response to the data and the feedback that we've heard about speed around the corner and cutting the corners here, there are 2 speed cushions in place at all of the approaches to slow speeds coming up to the pedestrian crossings. There are some green flexi posts in place that prevent both bikes and vehicles from cutting the corner at speed towards the pedestrian crossing. And the pedestrian crossings have been reddened to highlight that they're there and improve how it looks visually. From the drone footage, this is the type of information that I mentioned earlier that we've been able to see, and all of the instances where there have been near misses have been captured and tagged. We can look at the video clips of all of those, and they've all been graphed. What we've seen as a result of the trial between the left image and the right image is that there's been a big reduction in the approach speed to the intersection. That by slowing down all of the movements here with the speed cushions, it's now operating more like a roundabout, and it's made turning movements easier. That the near miss incidents for pedestrians have reduced by 70%. So we're seeing a lot fewer near misses, and the ones that we are seeing are happening at lower speeds. So there are less critical incidents. And there's an improved perception of the safety of pedestrians, particularly here. Along Knights Road, the image on the left is the pre-trial layout. You can see it's a very wide road, and it had very high speeds, especially for a road with so much pedestrian traffic that's close to those local schools. So we were seeing high extreme speeds in the top range up to 105 k's an hour on this 50-kilometre road, but also seeing high average speeds as well, which is concerning. In our engagement and discussions with community, the points of agreement that came across were people really wanted those things on fast wheels, like the e-scooters and micromobility things, and also people on bikes off the footpath. And people driving wanted those things as well out of the main carriageway where cars and traffic are moving. So getting those fast wheels off the footpath and keeping them separated from traffic was somewhere that we landed. In the first trial, we had 2 different layouts on each side of the road. So a cycleway / e-scooter facility going in each direction. On the south side of the road in the top screen there, you can see that the parking has been removed, and that was to retain the median strip, and in response to feedback that we had at that point about the parking not being well used on that side. We've also used the wave delineators, which were more aesthetically interesting than some of the more traditional models. One point around this work was it's not meant to look like roadworks. On the bottom image, you can see the other side of the road where we've used posts and bollards rather than the waves, and it's a more traditional layout with the riders on the outside of the parked cars, in between the parked cars and the traffic. So when we asked for community feedback, we asked about how people felt in terms of safety and which side of the road they preferred aesthetically as well, from people driving, riding, using all the different modes of transport. Finally, we've got the pop-up park that we've implemented on Birch Street here, which is a piece of road reserve opposite the station. In our initial engagement co-design, we found that people wanted somewhere to sit and wait for trains and buses and meet people. They wanted to see more art and see more native bush and plants as well. And so we worked with the local schools and the local arts centre to create the pop-up park, which is now in place. using mostly recycled and donated materials. It was our first trial and it created a home for engagement with the community. A lot of our residents in this area don't do digital and online engagement and needed that physical space to engage. The other thing that putting this park in achieved was it allowed us to raise awareness of the project as a whole for those people that don't engage with us on those traditional means of communication that we have. So those layouts were in place for 5 weeks during March while we measured a lot of data and took a lot of quantitative measures, and also did a lot of public engagement and communication and workshops with community. We learned that the changes at Waterloo Station worked really well, as discussed earlier. The pop-up park is working really well, but the layout on the main part of Knights Road wasn't achieving the aims that we were looking for, which was those safer journeys and so safer speeds, mode separation and perception of safety, while retaining the functionality of the road for all of the services, the commuters, the residents and all of the road users. We learned that there was still support for that separated mode shift, having the fast wheels off the footpath, but that the trial layout wasn't enough separation for the least confident users, although it was an improvement, and that people found that it looked reasonably cluttered as well. So what's happening next is that the Waterloo Station and the pop-up park are staying in place, and an amended layout down Knights Road is happening, informed by the feedback and data collected during the first trial. We've learned that there isn't enough space to have the degree of separation that people want, while having meeting the regulations that are required on a 50-kilometre space as well. So we're trialling a one-directional layout. And we've learned that even in this temporary trial, which is only on a section of the road, as we're trying to test a layout that works, there's a real desire for connection. People want to see and hear, to be obvious, how those shared pathways and cycleways link into the CBD. So we're also looking at ways to better connect the Beltway cycleway along to the Knights Road and into public transport. This new layout will be trialled during May and June, and a decision will be made in June as to what happens next. What we've learned from the trials and from the process going forward is that seeing is believing. Even during the engagement and workshops we put in place prior to the trials, some feedback we had once they were in place was that people didn't believe it would actually happen. That connection and that link to that bigger picture is really, really important, especially when you're doing this smaller work. That there's quite a big divide between what the community has said that they would like and what matters to the individuals that are on the road or using the road. Collectively, we all want safe journeys, we want good public transport, we want things to link up to each other and be clear, but individually we don't want the layout outside our homes to change. So that's a bit of a challenge as you work through this. We've learned that the language and the clarity really, really matters, and that we need to be very, very concrete when we talk to people about what changes are happening, and that can be a challenge in co-design when you are saying we're asking you what you would like to see. There will be some change, but what it will be depends on your answers to these questions. And that designing for that future that we do collectively want of reduced congestion, reduced carbon emissions and safer journeys for everybody really does need to happen now if we want to see that change going forward. We know there's big suppressed demand in our communities for micromobility modes of transport, e-bikes, e-scooters, but we need to make change to see that demand actualise and the potential of all of our networks realised. Our learnings for future projects with this style of working is that it takes a lot more resource on an ongoing basis than either we or Waka Kotahi were potentially prepared for, because the communication and the engagement is ongoing throughout the life of the project rather than something that you can do initially and step back from. It's a new way of working and it requires a lot of trust between councils and communities. People are not used to the activity being part of the engagement, and certainly initially they didn't believe that we were adaptable in response to feedback. The trials being part of the engagement is a very different conversation. And we have noticed that over the project, as we have adapted in response to what we've seen and heard on the street, that trust is building. You need that big picture narrative for what's happening nationally, what the big picture is as to why there's trials and change on this specific piece of road. And so it's easier to sell the cake as a whole rather than the ingredients that make it up. We have had a really tight deadline on this project because we received the funding in June last year and need to have delivered by June of this year. Working with co-design and really engaging with communities and making sure you have the time for that to happen and for it to happen more than once during the project so that you can have that iterative process. It takes time. It's really required to build trust that you show up face to face, even when things maybe aren't going so well. But particularly in a pandemic sort of situation where some of our older residents who do not do digital also don't feel safe doing face to face, that's been a bit of a challenge. And then the impact on shipping of materials has also been a challenge because we can't preempt that feedback from community to order things in advance, and shipping is delayed. But the tight deadline has had some positives as well. It's forced us to be quick, to fail fast, to adapt to what we're hearing, and that's helped us to build that trust as well. And it's forced us to move much more quickly than people are used to seeing council and transport projects happen. So while it's been challenging, we've definitely learned a lot, and it's been quite helpful as well. That engagement is really critical to success, and that again, ongoing face-to-face, showing up across the different areas of community, but also making sure there's time for all of the diverse sections to be in the same room so that they hear other voices than their own, and you don't end up workshopping in a bit of an echo chamber. That's been a really helpful thing as well. And that again just takes time and resource to make sure that you do it and you communicate about it well. So where we're at now is our second phase trials are on the ground, and we're collecting community feedback throughout May and June. Again, we'll need to move very quickly to action those decisions in June, and we'll be writing a full case study for Waka Kotahi for August on this project. We'd really welcome any questions that you'd like to send us to our Oaha Evolving Spaces email. I'm happy to discuss as well, but thank you very much for the time and opportunity to present. I'll pass on to Haley.
Thank you, Aileen, and thanks again to Alison and the ANA team for allowing us this opportunity to share some of our mahi out of Te Awa Kairangi, and also how we're putting people at the centre of our design decisions and also our infrastructure decisions. So, as Aileen said, if anyone has any further questions for Aileen or myself, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Ka kite.